Today I'm going to make it easy to understand Cura support structures, and we're starting right now. Hey, welcome to the channel. My name's Richard. This is the show that explores the world of 3D printing. Today is no different because we're diving in to tips and tricks on how to get the most out of support structures in Cura. Now, if you're new here, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Also, welcome to the channel and hit the little bell so you get notified every time that we do a brand new episode. So let's dive in. Support structures are not that hard. It can be a little bit difficult. We've got some prints we're going to show you. I've got a print working in the background that has a lot of support structure. We're going to show you that in a little bit closer to the end. And I'm going to show you the difference between traditional supports, and I'm going to explain them a little bit and how they work, as well as we're going to show you a little bit about tree supports before the end of today's video. So let's jump right in because we've got a lot to cover. So there's a couple things to consider in your model whether you need support structure or not. Now, there is such thing as called the 45-degree rule. So if an overhang is more than 45 degrees, and we're going to use this ruler as an example, you would see that this would need support structure underneath here if we were going to print this section. We would also need support structure here if this was our tall cylinder or block. So we would need support structure under here because we know that this is a 90-degree angle, which is greater than this 45-degree angle. So we would definitely need support structure. So can you get away with support structure of putting supports under areas that are greater than 45? Yes, you can. Do you need to go less than 45? No, you don't. So if we were going up to 50, 60, 70-degree overhangs, in the case of this 90-degree overhang, we would definitely need that support structure. Now, a great way to determine how well your printer prints overhangs is by printing a overhang test. And I'll link to one in the description down below for you guys to take a look at. Now, there's also a thing called bridging. And bridging is that span between two pillars. Now, the wider the span, there's a 5-millimeter rule here. So if you're 5 millimeters or less, you wouldn't need any support structure under bridging. If you have more than 5 millimeters, then of course you would probably need some sort of support structure to support that bridging going back and forth. So there is also a bridging test, and I am going to again link that down in the description below. All the models that we use today, we are going to link in our description, so make sure that you check that out. So now let's get on to the next part. Now, Cura has several settings to help you optimize your model supports. And here's how to get started. So what you're going to do is you're going to go up to Preferences. You're going to click on Configure Cura. It's going to open up this Preferences dialog box. And if we just hit the printer settings, or pardon me, the settings, visibility settings, you're going to see that it's normally set to basic. What we want to do is we want to go to this little checkbox that says Check All. And we're just going to click in there so that we have a check mark, and it's going to open up everything that we need to see when it comes to adding and taking care of supports. So we've got a little model of baby Yoda here, or the child as he's referred to on The Mandalorian. And this seems to be a really popular model, and this is a great demonstration because it has a lot of overhangs. And we can see that by looking at the fingers here. If we turn the model, you can see that these fingers look like they're going to start to print in midair. Same thing with this sleeve here. It looks like it could print in midair. And of course, there are parts on the ears. Now, when we look around the model, all these red areas that we're seeing, and we can see them here, here, around the fingertips, in the fingers, underneath the arm. These are all areas that Cura has pointed out that this model could use support. So if we look at our rule of thumb, and we're going to go into opening up our print settings here, and we're just going to go down to support. We can take a look at some of those support settings. Once we're here, we want to make sure that we generate support. So we're going to click the generate supports. Now, the first thing that you're presented with is everywhere or touching the build plate. And I'm going to show you what the difference is here. If we just go with touching the build plate and we let the model slice, we're going to go into the preview and I'll show you. The preview tool is very powerful when it comes to supports and doing supports in Cura. So once it finishes slicing here, we'll be able to go in there. Now, there are overhangs here that are more than 45 degrees. There's some that are upwards of 70 degrees. But the important thing here is to note that when you slice your model, the model itself already has all that math built into it. So we see we have overhangs here, we have overhangs here. So now, just the way this is with the standard support settings, we can get an estimation of 12 hours and 31 minutes and only 59 grams worth of material to use. But let's go into that preview now, and we can see if we just go by touching build plate, it's going to process that and build us a new look to our model. And we can see here where the support material actually laid out. And if we get really, really close to where those supports are, we can see that there's a lot of space between here and that fingertip. If we look down here at this section, we can see that there is a darker blue. This is your release area. That's the area that doesn't have a lot of material in it. It's just there enough to support the material that's going to be printed above it. Now, if we zoom in and come from the top and we scale this down, we can kind of see the support pattern that we're using here. And we can see that this is using just the standard zigzag pattern. What I want to point out to you is this side over here. Because we have this area building pretty much in midair, and we can see that with the fingers, there's nothing supporting those two fingers. You see that right here? Zoom in a little closer and we'll just move this up so you guys can see it. So you can see here, there's nothing supporting this. We need to get support material underneath that area. Otherwise, those fingers are just going to print in midair and you'll have some spaghetti and they'll look horrible. So in this case, we want to print everywhere, because if we print from touching the build plate, it's not going to give us exactly what we want. So let's go to print everywhere, and that will support all the areas in which we need. Now, support overhang angle, you can see I've got it set to 51 here. 51 is fine. I know we talked about 45 degree overhang. I've always found that 51 is kind of that sweet spot. Zigzag pattern, and you have different patterns in here. You have lines, grid, triangles, concentric. Zigzag is always going to be the default. You have cross and gyroid as well. So there are several different patterns. If we wanted to, we could change the pattern up. Let's go with lines, and we'll see exactly how that changes the supports that we're going to put into this model. Once it slices, now I've got mine set to automatic slicing. If you remember, we installed some printer plugins or Cura plugins for Cura a couple of videos back. I'll link to that up in the card so that you can go back and watch that if you're not sure how to put some of the plugins in. You can see it's increased our time to 14 hours and 26 minutes. And we're using a little bit more material. Let's go back to that preview now. So here in the preview, you can see now we are getting support material where we want it. And we're just going to move this so we can see where that's going to start supporting the fingers. And you can see how it's coming up and around the fingers and supporting that whole area. Now this darker area in blue here, you can see that's where it's supposed to release. If we look in much closer here, we can see that this area is not even touching the model, but this darker area is. And there's a reason for that, because we don't want to scar the model. Now, if this area is too far away from the model, you are going to get scarring and it may not turn out as pleasant as you want it to. But if we look at this model in its entirety now, we can see that the model itself has a lot more support material. We have some in the ears, we have some under the chin, under the ears section here, under the collar. So this really supported this model quite well. Now, will it be tough to get these supports off? There's a chance it might be. But the idea here is so that you can see all of this, what you want to do is you want to change your color scheme to line type. There are 4 different types in here. Material color is usually the default. So if we go to line type, we can see all of the different types of lines in different colors, and they're shaded here quite well. So let's go ahead and send this one off. We're going to save this to file, which we've already done because we've already printed it for you. Now, we didn't print it with this. We printed it in that zigzag pattern. Now, just to give you an idea of what these different patterns are, again, it's going to slice again for zigzag. Zigzag is the fastest to print and the simplest to remove by far. Now, lines are the next step up. It still makes for great, easy to remove supports, but it's slightly stronger than zigzag and doesn't usually pop off in one piece. You're going to be cranking that off with a pair of pliers. Now, concentric is the best for models with shapes near to spheres or cylinders. It tends to be slightly stronger than zigzag and lines, and it is only in a single direction. I want you to note that because of the single direction nature of the above 3 patterns, they tend to be more vulnerable. Vibrations and skinny support structures, for example, can result in the nozzle not perfectly lining up with previous layers, which could cause problems in the long run. So that's something to be aware of. The next 2 strongest would be your grid triangles. And now in this version, they have also added gyroid as well. So those are going to be your strongest. Both grid triangles and gyroid are great patterns to achieve sturdy supports. They're also resilient against vibration. However, they do increase print time and generally exhibit more contact with the support areas. This may be more difficult in post-processing. So that's something to be aware of when you're putting in your support material. Again, the different type of support material that you use, the more that it is going to come in contact with your print. So we're back to zigzag here, and we can see that as we go down, we can see that zigzag pattern. And all it's doing, we close up, get a close up in here, we can see that that zigzag, just move this up a little bit, you can see how it zigzags. So we're coming off this line, we're going up, doing an inner wall, coming down, doing an inner wall, going up and down, and it's just zigzagging. Whereas the lines are printing straight across in one direction all the time. Now, the infill in this, we're not really talking about today, but for lack of a better term, the one that we are using for infill, because I know somebody's going to ask about it, this infill that we're using is cubic, okay? Not really necessary for today's video because we are really concentrating on those supports. Now, the other thing that makes a big difference in your support is the support density. So when we talk about support density, we've got 20% here. There are different densities that you can go with. If we were to up this to make it stronger, let's go to 40%. We'll just double it. It's again going to slice for us, and when we come back, we'll see the difference between this and the support material of 40%. So now that we've changed that to 40% for our density, you can see it's a much tighter weave of that material. It's much closer together now. So the higher that number, the more dense that support is going to be. Think of it like your infill. Usually a great place to start is right around that 20% mark. You can go lower if you want to, but 20% is usually a good rule of thumb to stay with. Now, the other thing that we want to talk about, and I'm going to put a graphic up here on the screen, and this is Z support distance, or support Z distance. Now, we can look at that in our, down here where it says support Z distance. Right now we have it set to 0.16, and that's usually the default. I'm going to put the graphic up here to show you exactly what this is. This setting defines the distance from the top and the bottom of the support to the model. This setting has two sections, top distance and bottom distance. As we can see here, there's a top and bottom distance. A high value of these distance allows for a bigger gap between the model and the support, meaning easier post-processing and creates a smoother model surface due to the reduced number of contact points. A low value is useful when you're trying to support complex overhangs like the ones that we have here in the Yoda model. We'll just clean that up so we can see that again. So like we have here in the Yoda model. However, a low value does make supports harder to remove. So the lower this value, the harder they're going to be to remove. The higher the value, the further they are away from the actual model. Always play around with some distances to find the perfect value for your printer. Now, another thing that is important is this distance right here, the XY distance. And we're going to hone in on that. Right now we have it set to 0.8 of a millimeter, so it's less than 1 millimeter. And what does this do? Well, the XY distance, it's very similar to the Z distance. It adjusts the horizontal distance between a model and its supports. Again, the further the distance, the easier the support removal process is. The shorter the distance, the stronger the support structure is. So further away, easier it is to get away or get off of the model. The closer it is, the stronger it is. Typically, a large XY distance will mean better surface finishes on a vertical section. If vertical parts in your prints are roughed up by the adjacent supports, try increasing the XY distance. So if you're getting in this area, if you're finding that your model is just seeming not quite as smooth as it should be, then you may want to increase the distance between the support and the actual outer wall of the model. A lower XY distance will lead to a better support for overhangs, namely those next to vertical surfaces around the armpits of models, like we have here in Yoda. However, they may cause surface imperfection. Okay, so here we are looking at support distance priorities. Now, what is support distance priority? Well, let's go and we'll just click on it right here. We'll just hover over top of it and it'll tell us whether the support XY distance overrides the support Z distance or vice versa. When the XY overrides Z, the XY distance can push away the support from the model, influence the actual Z distance to the overhang. We can disable this by not applying an XY distance around the overhangs. Now, that is interesting because depending on the type of the overhang you're attempting to print, the Z distance can contradict the XY distance. In Cura, you can select your priority with these distances so that in case of contradiction, the most important distance is maintained. Typically, it's best to have a Z override XY because Z distance is what actually holds up the model. So we can see that XY overrides Z. So we want to change that to Z overrides XY. That will give us a little bit of a better model. You can always change this override setting if you're not certain what the model requires. You can also set a minimum XY distance. Then even when Z distance takes priority, the minimum XY distance is still maintained. So that's really important. We're going to let this change and we're going to see what our minimum support is at 0.4. Now visually it hasn't changed anything. It doesn't look like it's changed anything at all. But if we zoom out on our model, and we're just going to minimize this so we can see a little bit more of our model. We can see, especially right in the hand here, underneath this finger and underneath this finger. You can see that there's quite a distance there. between the X, Y, and Z overrides. So Z is overriding X, Y in this case, so that Z gets the best for our supports. Now there's such thing as horizontal expansion, and that is when support areas are very thin. It's difficult for your printer to create sturdy structures to support such small areas. This setting allows you to set a horizontal expansion so that even small support areas are adequately supported. Inputting a large value for this setting will always result in sturdier supports, but this setting does require your printer to use more filament. So if we go into our drop down again, and we're not sure exactly where to find that, we can always type it into the search, and we're just going to type in horizontal expansion. So if we just type in the word horizontal, we can see here that our support horizontal expansion is set to 0 millimeters. So we can increase that as well. There's also horizontal expansion in the shell as well. We're not going to worry about that. What we want is the expansion for the support. So if we increase this number, it can give us better support. Okay? One of the things I wanted to point out to you was when we were talking about distances earlier on, you see this darker area right here, this hatch area? This is an area in which your models are being supported, but it's very little material being used so that you don't scar the model too much. And you can see as we move up, there's a little bit more that appears there, and then our model continues on. Now we can see as we look at Yoda here that this one has a lot of support material in it, and I've kind of decapitated him, took the top of his head off. So we can see that there's a lot of support material. Right now we're at 16 hours, 1 minute to print a model that is roughly about 3 inches tall. That's a lot of time for printing a small model like this with all the support. So what can we do to change that? Well, one of my favorite things to do is turn off generate supports and go down to the experimental section. And in the experimental section, the very first thing you're going to find is tree supports. What this does is it envelops the model and generates branches that come off what looks to be like a shell around the model, and those branches support certain areas of the model. So let's turn tree supports on. It's going to slice. We don't need the other support open. And then you'll get to see exactly how Yoda looks with these tree supports. So now that our tree supports are done generating, we can see that our time has been reduced by almost 4 hours. We're using a little bit less material. So we're down to 13 hours and 57 minutes for just a little model. And we can see here how the model is enveloped in those tree supports. All right, so looking here at the model now that we've stopped moving it around, you can see here how the tree supports come up into little branches and just have little areas that branch off to support different areas of the model. The fingers are a big example of that. So is that one lip, and all underneath the collar. You see the darker area? Much easier to get off. This is going to allow us to remove this shell actually really easily. So we can see how tree supports work. If we look at the bottom, you can see what it does. It creates a little bit of a shell here around the model, using less material and in the long run, and actually being quite easy to remove without scarring the model as much as traditional supports will. Now, tree supports are important if you're doing complex models like this. If you're just doing simple shapes, that require overhangs, parts for a 3D printer, something along that line, you might want to use the traditional support methods. But if you're doing complex models like this little baby Yoda, or the child as it should be referred to, you may want to use tree supports. Now, not all models like this will use tree supports either. If they're multiple piece models, you may want to just print them in the best orientation with the least amount of support. But if they're one piece like this, tree supports really come in handy. Now let's take a look at both of these models and the tree supports in which they are the two different types of supports that we put on them, and show you how easy it is to take them off. So let's take a look at these two models. We have two baby Yodas here, as you can see. We'll just move them back into frame here a little bit. We have one with tree supports and one with traditional zigzag supports. And we can see a huge difference. Now, the one with tree supports looks like it used a lot more material. In reality, it didn't, because we can see here that it's actually all hollow. It just created a very thin wall. We're going to show you how to take these off here in just a second. But here on the regular supports, you can see some places that failed because they had nothing to grab onto. You can see here underneath the ear where it failed because, again, it had nothing to hold on to. While it did recover, it did knock off little bits here and there. So taking off these supports can be a bit of a challenge. So we're going to go ahead and just try and remove some of the supports here on the first one. And we can see that it's pretty tough to get some of these off. So we are going to need a pair of pliers to do so. We don't want to wreck the model, and we don't want to cut our fingers. So we're going to go get a pair of pliers, and we're just going to start to remove some of the support material that is on here. All right, so I'm back here with a pair of pliers and a pair of snips or side cutters. We're just going to start with this big piece right here. And you can see how tough these can be to get off your model. Now, because of that space that we used in the model, we don't have a lot of scarring on the surface of our model, but it is a little tough to clean up. Now, this particular piece right here that we're working on, I don't want to break the fingers that are in there. So I'm going to try and come in with a pair of snips, a pair of side cutters here, and cut this in half if I can, and take out the bottom first. So we can see there that the bottom came off. Now I'm going to try and get a pry in here so that we can get that off without breaking the finger like we just did. We just broke that finger. And this is some of the things that can happen when you're removing supports. So we know that, this was a little tougher, and we've got a little bit of scarring underneath the chin here. We broke those fingers. We can fix those fingers, but the point is that it shouldn't have happened. And we could have had a little bit more infill in there or something along that line, but we still have a little bit of scarring to clean up. So we've got some underneath the arm here that we're going to have to clean up. We have some on the front face that we're going to have to clean up, some on the base as well. But overall, the model's not bad, and we did break those fingers. A little bit of super glue will fix that, but at the end of the day, that's something that you want to try to avoid on delicate areas. Now, in contrast to that, let's look at the tree supports. This is the beauty of tree supports. Watch this. Tree supports come off very, very easily. And we didn't break those fingers. We have a much cleaner model. We've got a little bit of area here that we can clean up just a little bit. But overall, we have a much cleaner model. Now, the first model's not bad either, but those tree supports, look how that came off. That was just one big chunk. And we can see those branches, how they come off the tree supports. We can see those branches and how they work. Now, tree supports aren't going to work for everything, but In this case, they work great because of the model that we were doing. So understanding Cura support structures is actually pretty easy when you think about it. And if you know how to master your supports, you're going to have a much better time getting them off your model. Now, YouTube has chosen this video right here. Yep, I'm on the right side. This video right here to entice you to watch even more of our videos, and we hope that you do. There's also a playlist right down here that we've linked to for all of our Cura tutorials. We hope that you go and have a look at that. If you're new here, please subscribe, hit that like button. Also, comment down below and share this with your friends. And until next time, my friends, remember that the first layer is always your foundation to a great print.